I am Kristen Jeffers. I started a organization called the Black Urbanist. It's kind of a division of Kristen Jeffers Media, my over umbrella. At first, for me, it was making sense of what was going on around me. I founded the site in the process of getting a Master of Public Affairs. And I've always been interested in how cities work, how things come together. Really, what I'm focused on right now at this moment is creating a platform for a Black queer feminist urbanism, where urban planning and policy meet us as we are. I'm specifically focused on how Black women and queer people are interacting with public spaces. Some of my friends in the queer community who are what we would consider gender nonconforming, they are harassed, and in many cases, worst cases, they're murdered. And so that's where one of the ways that public space is different for us, depending on the body we're in, is sometimes being in a certain public space means death. If your house, you buy your house for one price, and then when it's time to sell, it might actually be lower because you walk in as a Black person and they've reappraised your house. I know there was a recent news article where a woman had to hide her pictures of her as a Black person and put more pictures of her white husband up in the house because the prevailing idea in the housing industry is that white bodies command more money. Some jurisdictions, especially suburban and rural jurisdictions, don't want to provide bus service because they believe that the buses will bring trouble. There's what's called redlining, how the federal government baked in this idea that certain neighborhoods were good and bad based on race. And that's just kind of on the consumer facing level. There's disparities in hiring. There's this assumption that Black folks can only provide insight on Black neighborhoods. Years and years ago, they would blatantly say they don't want Black bodies here, but now it's more subtle and insidious. At this moment, that we're still having this conversation, having to convince people, having to tell people, having to model for people that our lives matter. That to me is what makes me feel a degree of lack of freedom. I am on stage, I'm giving a performance, I'm giving a lesson, and I always try to help people laugh in some way, shape, or form. So that thrill of being able to perform information, that thrill of hearing my favorite songs, eating my favorite foods, whether or not it's in a takeout container like it is now, or back in the before times when we could go to the restaurants and eat. And then being in nature, by water especially, and then of course making something with my hands, specifically yarn crafts. That's when I feel freedom. And of course, when I'm with my yarn crafts, I just know it's something that I'm making that can contribute to the world. I'm doing my part to help with climate change because I'm practicing slow fashion. I'm doing my part to clothe my community in case it comes to a point where we're living in pods and somebody needs to know how to fix clothing. But then I also have my fun things about it. So that's my freedom piece right there. We need to have this conversation about who gets paid what. I know a lot of people are trying to figure out what defunding the police force would look like. What it looks like by starters is asking yourself, do we need military grade things to defend the public? In a case where someone is in mental health psychosis and they can't help their mental state, who do they need the most? Do they really need a tank at their door? Do they need a battering ram, or do they need a hug? And do they need reassurance that everything will be okay? We need to have things like transformative justice so that when people do harm, people have a space to admit that harm. They have space to talk through that harm. They have space to make restitution to people. Women still across the board make less than men, no matter what race category they come in. How do we establish that parity? How do we fix that harm? How do we make it safer? I think we need to have some ways and some coaches and guides of people so that they don't feel like they need to pick up a gun and hurt people. They don't need to go and intimidate voters or go and kill people that they don't like. But they can process their feelings of dislike or disgust in a productive way so that they end up no longer having those feelings.